Commander Roland Pierce came to Evan Draxler's cabin before the storm, before the sirens, before the town knew it was standing on danger. He was Evan's former commander, the man who once sent him into a mission that cost a brother-in-arms his life. This time, Pierce brought another mission, but Hawk, the German shepherd, knew something was wrong before Evan did. The dog ignored the commander's voice and stared at the snow beneath his boots as if the ground itself was hiding a confession. Soon rain began falling through snow. Floors started bleeding water, and Bright Hollow's evacuation plan led everyone toward the lowest point in town. Evan realized too late that he had not been called to save the town. He had been chosen to take the blame. Where are you watching from? And would you trust the commander's orders or the dog's warning? Please like and subscribe to help us create more powerful stories of courage, faith, and loyalty. Morning did not arrive all at once in the northern hills. It seeped in slowly, like light finding its way through a wound that had never fully closed. Snow covered everything, not gently, not kindly. It pressed down on the land in a quiet, suffocating way, as if the earth itself had been told to stay still and obey. Evan Draxler stood halfway up the ridge, his boots planted firmly in the packed white. At 38, he carried his height just over 6 feet, with the kind of stillness that did not come from peace but from discipline carved into bone. His build was lean and compact, not the broad display of strength people admired, but the efficient kind that endured. His face was clean-shaven, sharp lines exposed without softness, square jaw, defined cheekbones, skin pale but weathered by years of northern cold and wind. His dark brown hair was cut in a military style, slightly longer than regulation, just enough to suggest he had left that world. But not far. His gray-blue eyes never settled. They measured, they waited, they remembered. He raised the rifle slowly, steadying it against his shoulder. The target, nothing more than a small metal plate half buried in the valley below, would have been invisible to most. But Evan had spent years learning how to see what others missed. Behind him, moving lower to the ground, almost blending into the terrain, was Hawk. The German shepherd was 4, maybe 5 years old. His coat carried the classic yellow-black pattern, though dulled by weather and time, not the polished sheen of a show dog. His body was built for endurance, lean, strong, efficient. His ears stood upright, catching sound that never reached human awareness. His amber-brown eyes did not wander. They locked, focused, listening. Evan adjusted his breath. Inhale, hold, release halfway. The world narrowed to the scope, wind direction, distance, elevation, control. He began to squeeze the trigger. Hawk stopped, not abruptly, not with panic, but with intention. The dog's body went still, weight evenly distributed, head lowered slightly. His gaze shifted, not toward the target, not toward the trees, but downward, at the ground. Evan did not fire. That alone would have surprised anyone who knew him years ago. In the past, he would have taken the shot. Trusted calculation over instinct, trusted himself over everything else. A faint sound reached him. A brittle, almost delicate crack. The kind of sound ice made when it was too thin for what rested on top of it. Evan's finger eased off the trigger. He lowered the rifle slowly. "What is it?" he murmured, voice low, steady. Hawk did not respond in the way most dogs would. No bark, no movement toward him. Instead, the dog took one step forward, placed a paw down carefully, then withdrew it almost immediately, as if testing something unseen. Evan crouched. The snow looked undisturbed. Perfect. Too perfect. He brushed a gloved hand across the surface. Beneath the powder, a thin layer of ice revealed itself, clear, smooth, wrong. He pressed slightly. The ice flexed, not enough to break, but enough to answer. Something beneath it shifted, not falling, not collapsing, moving. Evan's jaw tightened. For a brief moment, something from another life surfaced. Dark water pressing against metal, a structure groaning under pressure, a delay. Just seconds too long. He exhaled. Not today, he said quietly. Hawk stepped back, as if the decision had already been made. They turned away from the target. The descent was slower. Snow softened where the sun touched it, revealing slick patches of ice beneath. Evan moved with careful precision, testing each step before committing. Hawk moved differently, lower, fluid, adjusting without hesitation. The truck waited where they had left it, half covered in fresh snow. An old pickup, paint faded, engine reliable. It did not belong to the present any more than Evan did. Hawk jumped into the passenger seat without being told. Evan started the engine. The drive back to the cabin cut through dense pine forest, branches heavy with snow that occasionally fell in soft, sudden cascades. The world felt muted, insulated, too quiet. He noticed it before he understood it. No birds, no distant movement, just wind and something beneath it. The cabin appeared through the trees, small, wooden, practical. It stood at the edge of the clearing like something that had chosen isolation rather than been abandoned. Evan slowed, then stopped. Not suddenly, not out of fear, out of recognition. There was another vehicle, a dark SUV parked just beyond the tree line, partially hidden. Snow had already begun to gather along its tires, but not enough to suggest it had been there overnight. It had arrived recently and then stayed. Evan's eyes shifted. The front porch. A man stood there, still, waiting. Evan cut the engine. Hawk was already standing now, body angled forward, ears locked. But he did not growl. That was what made it worse. Evan stepped out of the truck. Cold air bit into his face immediately, sharp and clean. He closed the door quietly and began walking toward the cabin. Each step measured, each breath controlled. The man did not move to greet him, did not raise a hand, did not call out. He simply stood there, as if the distance between them did not matter, as if time did not matter. When Evan got close enough, the details resolved. Commander Roland Pierce. He was in his late 50s, tall, just under Evan's height, but carrying himself with a rigid control that made him seem larger. His face was long, composed, clean-shaven, with lines that spoke not of age, but of decisions made without hesitation. His hair, dark with streaks of gray, was cut neatly, untouched by the disorder of the weather. His eyes were gray, cold, still. He wore a long charcoal coat, perfectly fitted, untouched by snow despite standing outside. Beneath it, a dark turtleneck, clean lines, controlled presence. He looked like a man who did not belong to the wilderness. He looked like a man who had brought something with him. "You still take your time," Pierce said. His voice was calm even. Evan stopped a few steps away. "You still show up without warning," Evan replied. No warmth, no hostility, just acknowledgement. Behind him, Hawk stepped down from the truck. The dog did not approach Pierce, did not circle, did not test. He moved instead to a point slightly to Evan's side, positioned, deliberate, a line. Pierce's gaze flicked toward the dog, then back to Evan. "He's older," Pierce said. "He's smarter," Evan replied. A pause settled between them. Snow drifted lightly through the air, catching in the space that neither man chose to fill. Then something shifted, not above, below. Hawk's attention dropped again, not to Pierce, not to his hands, to the ground beneath him. Evan followed the dog's gaze. At first, nothing stood out. Just snow, untouched, perfect. But then, subtle, almost invisible, a shallow depression. Not a footprint, not quite. A softness in the surface, as if something beneath it had pressed upward and stopped. Evan's focus sharpened. Pierce had been standing there for some time, Long enough to notice something like that. Long enough to step away. But he hadn't. "Why are you here?" Evan asked. Pierce did not answer immediately. His eyes remained on Evan, steady, unreadable. Finally he spoke. "Because there's something happening," he said, "and I need someone who knows how to see it." Evan did not move. Behind him, Hawk shifted his weight slightly, not toward Pierce, away from the ground beneath him, a warning, not loud, not dramatic, but precise. Evan felt it settle into him, not as fear, but as recognition. Somewhere far below the snow and ice and frozen earth, something had begun to move. And whatever it was, it had already started before Pierce arrived. Pierce did not step inside the cabin. He remained on the porch, one hand resting lightly against the wooden railing as if testing its strength without appearing to do so. Snow gathered slowly along the shoulders of his dark coat, but he made no effort to brush it away. Evan noticed that. He noticed everything. Inside, the cabin was warm, but the warmth did not reach the doorway. It stopped where the past stood waiting. "You're going to explain," Evan said, his voice low, steady, controlled. "Not a request." Pierce's gaze drifted briefly across the clearing, scanning the trees, the truck, the edge of the snow line. He was not avoiding the question. He was deciding how much truth was useful. "There's a town," Pierce said finally, "to Bright Hollow." Evan didn't respond. The name meant nothing yet. 3 hours north," Pierce continued. "Population under 2,000. Remote enough that most things don't get noticed unless someone wants them noticed." That phrasing was deliberate. Evan stepped closer, boots pressing into the snow with a quiet crunch. "And something's happening there," he said. Pierce nodded once. "Ground instability, water appearing where it shouldn't. Minor structural shifts, nothing dramatic enough to trigger a federal response." A pause. "Not officially." Evan studied him. "You're here anyway." Another pause. "Yes." Behind Evan, Hawk moved, not toward Pierce, not toward the cabin. He circled once, then stopped at the edge of the porch, head lowered, nose close to the ground. His body stiffened, not in fear, but in concentration. The dog's ears flicked slightly, adjusting to something beneath the surface. Pierce noticed the movement this time. "What's wrong with him?" he asked. "He listens," Evan said. "That doesn't answer the question." "It does," Evan replied. A thin silence stretched between them. Pierce exhaled slowly, then shifted his stance. "There have been reports," he said. "Unofficial ones. People claiming water is coming up through their floors. That the ground feels hollow." The word lingered. Hollow. Evan's gaze sharpened almost imperceptibly. "And no one filed anything?" he asked. "They tried." "Then what?" Pierce's jaw tightened just slightly. "They were dismissed." Evan let that settle. Dismissed didn't mean wrong. It meant inconvenient. "And you want me to do what?" Evan asked. Pierce looked at him directly now. "I want you to tell me if it's real." Evan almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. "You don't need me for that," he said. "You've got analysts, engineers, satellite data." "Yes," Pierce replied calmly. "And none of them stand on the ground the way you do." The words hung there. Not praise, not trust. A calculation. Before Evan could respond, a voice cut through the cold air from the edge of the clearing. "You finally decided to bring someone who listens?" Both men turned. A figure emerged from between the trees, moving slowly but with purpose. Gideon Hale. He was in his early 60s, though the land had aged him beyond that. His frame was lean, almost wiry, his shoulders slightly bent forward, not from weakness, but from years spent walking uneven terrain. His gray hair was unkempt, pushed back without care, and his face carried deep lines carved by wind and time rather than comfort. He wore a heavy canvas coat, brown and worn, patched at the elbows and shoulders. Underneath, a dark flannel shirt, thick work pants, and boots that had long since lost any sense of newness. Everything about him suggested utility, survival. His pale blue eyes, however, were sharp. Too sharp. They didn't listen before, Gideon went on, stopping a few steps away. Don't see why they'd start now. Pierce didn't greet him. You filed the reports, Pierce said instead. Gideon gave a faint, humorless nod. 3 of them, he replied. Ground shifts, water seepage, acoustic anomalies. He glanced at Evan. That means it sounds wrong when you step on it. Evan held his gaze. And they ignored you. They archived it, Gideon corrected. That's a nicer word for burying something. Hawk moved closer to Gideon now, but not fully relaxed. He circled once, then paused, watching him carefully. Gideon noticed. Dog's smarter than most men I've met, he muttered. He's careful, Evan said. Good, Gideon replied. He'll need to be. Pierce shifted his weight. We're not here to debate procedure, he said. No, Gideon answered. You're here because something's already past the point where procedure matters. That landed harder than the wind. Evan looked between them. What exactly did you see? He asked Gideon. The older man hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but out of precision. The ground doesn't give way, he said slowly. Not like a landslide, not like frost heave. He pointed down toward the snow near the cabin. It feels empty first. Evan's eyes flicked instinctively to the area Hawk had been watching earlier. Like it's being hollowed out, Gideon continued, from underneath. A long pause followed. Then Hawk suddenly froze, not gradually, not cautiously. One moment he was standing, alert but controlled, and the next his entire body locked in place, every muscle tightened as if something had reached up through the earth and touched him. His head snapped to the side. Not toward any of the men. Not toward the trees, toward the far edge of the clearing where the snow lay undisturbed beneath a cluster of pines. A faint sound followed. Soft, sharp, a crack. But not from above, from below. Hawk took a step backward, not retreating, repositioning. Evan felt it then, not through sight, not through sound, but through the soles of his boots. A vibration, so subtle it could have been dismissed. But it wasn't random, it moved, like pressure shifting through something confined. Evan didn't speak, neither did Gideon. Even Pierce, for the briefest moment, went still. Then the sensation passed. The ground settled. The snow remained perfect, as if nothing had happened. But Hawk did not relax. Pierce cleared his throat quietly, recovering his composure faster than the others. That's why we're here, he said. Evan didn't look at him. He was still watching the trees, watching the place where nothing had moved. You already knew, Evan said. It wasn't a question. Pierce didn't answer directly. I suspected, he said instead. That's not the same thing. No, Pierce agreed. It's not. Gideon let out a slow breath. It's spreading, he said. Started small. Just a few spots now. He gestured vaguely toward the north. It's moving. Toward Bright Hollow, Evan said. Gideon nodded. Evan finally turned back to Pierce. And you want me to walk into it? I want you to tell me what it is before it becomes something we can't contain. Evan's expression didn't change. Contain, he repeated quietly. Pierce held his gaze. Yes. Evan studied him for a long moment. Then he glanced at Hawk. The dog's focus had shifted again, not upward, not outward, but downward, tracking something no one else could see. A memory surfaced. A different place, a different structure, the same feeling beneath his feet. He had ignored it then. He would not ignore it now. When do we leave? Evan asked. Pierce didn't hesitate. Now would be best. Gideon shook his head slightly. You won't outrun it, he said. Doesn't work like that. We're not outrunning anything, Pierce replied. Evan walked past them toward the truck. Hawk followed immediately, falling into step without command. At the door, Evan paused, looking back once at the cabin, at the clearing, at the untouched snow, at the place that no longer felt entirely solid. Then he opened the door and got in. The engine started with a low, steady rumble. Pierce moved toward his SUV. Gideon remained where he was for a moment longer, watching them. Then slowly he turned his gaze downward again, as if the land itself had more to say. Bright Hollow did not look like a place that was breaking. It looked polished. As Evan's truck rolled down the last stretch of road into town, the world shifted from muted wilderness into something almost unreal. Snow still covered the ground, but it no longer lay soft and natural. It had hardened, flattened, sealed beneath a thin layer of frozen rain that reflected the pale daylight like glass. The sky above was overcast, but bright, too bright for winter. The light diffused in a way that erased shadows instead of casting them. It made everything feel exposed, and yet nothing felt clear. Evan slowed the truck as they passed the first row of houses. Small practical homes with wood siding, steep roofs, and narrow porches. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, but not enough to match the number of homes. People were outside. Not many, but enough. They stood in small clusters, speaking quietly, glancing down more often than they looked at each other. That told him everything. Fear had already arrived, it just hadn't found a voice yet. Hawk stood in the passenger seat, body tense but controlled. His head was low, nose shifting between the air and the ground, reading layers of information Evan could not access. The dog did not look ahead. He tracked downward. Evan noticed. He always noticed. They passed a narrow street where a woman stood in her doorway, arms wrapped tightly around herself despite wearing a thick coat. Her name would come later, but what mattered now was what she said as they slowed. It's coming up through the floor. Her voice was steady, too steady, like someone who had already moved past panic and into something quieter. Evan didn't stop, not yet. He needed context first. At the center of town stood a low rectangular building with large windows fogged by heat inside. A small sign hung above the entrance, Bright Hollow General Store. He parked there. Pierce's SUV was already ahead, positioned at an angle that gave him a clear view of both the street and the building entrance. Calculated. Evan stepped out. Cold air hit differently here, not clean, not sharp, heavy, like it carried something unseen. Hawk jumped down beside him, landing lightly, immediately lowering his head again. His paws moved with precision, stepping around certain patches of ground as if guided by something internal. Pierce approached from the store entrance. We'll meet her inside, he said. Evan didn't ask who. He followed. The interior of the store was warmer, but the warmth felt artificial, forced against something pressing in from the outside. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with basic supplies, canned goods, tools, winter gear, but there were gaps, not from lack of supply, from people preparing to leave. Near the back of the store stood a woman in her early 40s, studying a set of folded maps spread across a wooden counter. Dr. Miriam Kessler. She was tall, around 5'7", with a compact, field-ready build that suggested she spent more time outdoors than behind a desk. Her chestnut brown hair was tied loosely at the nape of her neck, strands escaping around her face in a way she clearly didn't care to fix. Her skin was pale but not fragile, weathered lightly, the kind of complexion earned through years of working in harsh conditions. Her face was sharp, intelligent, focused. When she looked up, her eyes, gray-green, precise, moved quickly across Evan, assessing posture, stance, the way he held tension in his shoulders. She understood what she was looking at. "Draxler," she said, not a question. Evan nodded once. "Kessler." Pierce stepped in between them slightly, but not enough to break the line of sight. "Tell him," Pierce said. Miriam didn't look at him. She turned one of the maps around, pushing it toward Evan. "This town," she began, her voice controlled, measured, "sits on a limestone basin, naturally formed. Thousands of years of water movement carved out a network of channels beneath it." Evan studied the map. Lines, curves, intersecting paths, not random. "Used to," she continued. "Water flowed through these channels, redistributed pressure naturally. It kept the ground stable." Evan's eyes narrowed slightly. "And now?" Miriam's jaw tightened. "Now those channels are blocked." She tapped several points on the map. Concrete reinforcements, structural, sealing. A reservoir project about 15 years ago. They wanted to control water flow, stabilize the region for development. Evan didn't look up. "They trapped it." "Yes." The word hung there. Simple, final. Hawk moved. The sound of his claws against the wooden floor was soft, but deliberate. He circled once, then stopped. Not near the door, not near the windows, but near the center of the room. His head lowered, his ears angled forward. He stood perfectly still. Miriam noticed. "What is he doing?" she asked quietly. "He's listening," Evan replied. Pierce exhaled softly, impatience threading through the sound. "We don't have time for—" A faint noise cut him off. Not loud, not sharp, but unmistakable. A soft, hollow tapping. From below, the entire room went still. Hawk's body shifted instantly, not in fear, in alignment. He stepped backward, one step, then another, until his back pressed lightly against Evan's leg. Anchoring, grounding. His eyes locked onto a single point on the floor. Not moving, not blinking. The tapping came again. Slower this time. Deliberate. 3 beats. Pause, then 2. Miriam's face changed. Not panic. Recognition. "That's not random," she whispered. Evan crouched slowly, placing his palm flat against the wooden floor. Cold. Too cold for a heated room. He pressed harder. For a moment, nothing. Then, a faint shift. Not vertical. Lateral. Something moving across a confined space, not collapsing, not breaking, traveling. Evan didn't breathe. Hawk let out a low sound, not a growl, not a bark. Something quieter, deeper. A warning. Not about what was there, but about what was coming. The tapping stopped, just like that. Gone. But the silence that followed was heavier than the sound had been. Pierce straightened, recovering first. "How widespread?" he asked. Miriam didn't answer immediately. She was still staring at the floor. "Wider than we thought," she said finally. "If it's moving, then the pressure's redistributing." "Toward where?" Evan asked. Miriam met his eyes. "That's the problem," she said. "It doesn't move randomly. It follows structure." Evan stood. His mind was already mapping it. The lines on the paper, the spaces between them. Hawk shifted again, stepping away from the center of the room, moving toward the edge, avoiding the exact spot he had marked moments before. Evan followed the motion. He stepped carefully. Tested the ground without appearing to. Every instinct he had was telling him the same thing. The system wasn't failing. It was adapting. Outside voices began to rise, not loud, not panicked, but different. Evan moved toward the door. Pierce followed. Miriam hesitated, then gathered her maps and came after them. On the street, a small crowd had formed. The woman from earlier stood near the front now, her coat hanging loosely around her shoulders. Up close, she appeared younger than Evan had first thought. Mid-30s, slender, with light brown hair pulled back in a loose tie. Her face was pale, not just from the cold, but from something deeper. Fear held in place. "My name's Elena Brooks," she said when Evan approached. Her voice was steady. Again, too steady. "It's in my house," she added. "The floor, no, it's not right." Evan nodded once. "Show me." They moved quickly. Hawk stayed close, but not directly beside Evan. His path curved slightly, avoiding patches of ground that looked no different from the rest. Evan adjusted without question. He trusted that more than anything Pierce had said. Elena's house was small, practical, similar to the others. Inside, the air was colder than expected. That was the first sign. The second, the floorboards. Near the center of the room, the wood had darkened, not from above, from below. Water pressed upward through the seams, forming thin, steady lines that spread slowly across the surface. Clear, cold, relentless. Evan crouched, pressed his fingers lightly against the damp wood. There it was again. Pressure, not settling, pushing. Hawk entered slowly, nose close to the floor. He traced the edge of the darkened area, then stopped abruptly. His body stiffened. He refused to step forward. Evan looked at the exact point where the dog had halted. The wood there was darker, denser, as if something beneath it had chosen that exact place. He stood. "We need to move people," he said. Elena swallowed. "To where?" Evan didn't answer. Because he didn't know yet. And that was the problem. The rain did not fall like a storm. It arrived quietly, thin lines at first, almost invisible against the pale sky, slipping through the snow as if the season itself had forgotten what it was supposed to be. It did not drum against rooftops or lash against windows. It settled into wood, into soil, into the unseen spaces beneath everything. And it did not stop. By late afternoon, Bright Hollow had begun to change, not dramatically, not in ways that would force immediate panic, but in small, precise shifts that made everything feel uncertain. Snow no longer held its shape. It softened from within, collapsing not from heat but from pressure below. The ground, once firm beneath layers of frost, now carried a subtle give, as if something beneath it was pushing upward, testing the limits of what it could hold. Evan stood at the edge of the main street watching. People moved differently now. They walked slower, spoke quieter, looked down more often than they looked ahead. Hawk stood at his side, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, but not quite. The dog's posture had changed since they arrived. He no longer scanned the distance. He tracked the ground. Every step he took was deliberate, every shift in weight measured. Twice he adjusted his path to avoid sections of street that appeared no different from the rest. Evan adjusted with him. He trusted that more than anything else. Behind them, the door of the general store opened, and Miriam stepped out, clutching a worn folder against her chest. The edges of the papers inside were uneven, aged. Not the clean lines of recent documentation, but something older, something overlooked. "I found the project records," she said, her voice tight but controlled. "Not in any official archive. These were filed under structural maintenance, misclassified." Evan turned. "Show me." They moved under the shallow awning beside the store where the rain slid off in narrow streams. Miriam unfolded the documents carefully, pressing them flat against a wooden crate. The diagrams were detailed, too detailed to be accidental. "A reservoir," she said, pointing to a section near the top of the map. "They built it 15 years ago, artificial lake, meant to regulate seasonal runoff, reduce flooding downstream." Evan's eyes followed the lines downward. "And these?" he asked. "Drainage channels," Miriam replied. "Original limestone conduits, natural paths water used to take through the basin." Evan didn't need her to finish. They blocked them. Miriam nodded. Partially. Enough to control flow. Enough to redirect pressure where they wanted it. Evan exhaled slowly. And now the pressure has nowhere to go. Yes. The word sat heavy between them. Not theoretical, not speculative. Certain. From across the street, Pierce approached again, his coat darker now where the rain had settled into the fabric. He moved with the same controlled precision as before, but there was something else beneath it now. Urgency. "You've seen enough," he said. Evan didn't look at him. "I've seen what you already knew," he replied. Pierce stopped a few feet away. "That's why you're here." "No," Evan said quietly. "That's why you're still standing here instead of somewhere else." A flicker of something passed through Pierce's expression. Not anger. Acknowledgement. Before either man could continue, a voice called out from further down the street. "Evan!" He turned. A woman approached, walking with measured steps that balanced authority and restraint. Mayor Lillian Cross. She was in her late 40s, her posture straight, shoulders squared as if the weight of the town rested visibly on her frame. Her dark brown hair was pulled back tightly, not a strand out of place despite the rain. Her face was composed, controlled, sharp lines softened only slightly by the fatigue around her eyes. She wore a long navy coat, buttoned fully, gloves dark and fitted. Everything about her suggested order, structure, control. "Dr. Kessler told me you were here," she said, stopping in front of them. Her gaze moved from Evan to Pierce, then briefly to Hawk before returning to Evan. "You've seen the situation?" "I've seen enough to know it's not contained," Evan replied. Lillian's jaw tightened slightly. "We've issued an evacuation order," she said. "Precautionary. Temporary." "To where?" Evan asked. "The school," she answered without hesitation. "It's reinforced. Structurally sound. It's the designated emergency shelter." Evan didn't respond immediately. He looked past her, down the slope. The town dipped slightly toward the south, subtle, almost unnoticeable unless you knew how to read land. But he knew. And Hawk. Hawk had already turned. His body angled away from the direction Lillian had indicated. His ears lowered not in fear but in rejection. Evan followed the dog's gaze. Then he looked back at Lillian. "That's the lowest point in town," he said. A pause, small but heavy. Lillian held his eyes. "The building is reinforced," she repeated. "So is everything else," Evan replied. Silence stretched between them. Rain continued to fall, steady, quiet, relentless. Hawk moved, not quickly, not urgently, but with absolute certainty. He stepped off the edge of the street and onto a narrow strip of ground between two houses, his paws placed carefully, one after the other, as if following something only he could perceive. Then he stopped. He lowered his head and pressed his nose close to the ground. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the earth shifted, not collapsing, not breaking. A slow, subtle rise, barely enough to disturb the surface, but enough. The wet soil pushed upward in a small, uneven bulge, like a breath taken beneath skin. Miriam gasped softly. "That's pressure," she whispered. Hawk stepped back immediately, not startled, expectant. The ground settled again, flat, unbroken, as if it had never moved. But the mark remained, a slight distortion in the perfect surface. Evan stared at it, not in disbelief, in recognition. He had seen something like that once before, in a place where the ground had given way seconds later. He turned back to Lillian. "That's not a possibility," he said quietly. "That's a direction." Lillian's composure held, but just barely. "We don't have confirmation of structural collapse," she said. "We have irregularities, yes, but nothing that justifies redirecting evacuation." Evan stepped closer. "You're not evacuating people away from danger," he said. "You're moving them toward where it's going to break." Pierce intervened. "We're not here to override local authority," he said. Evan didn't take his eyes off Lillian. "No," he replied. "You're here to make sure it stays controlled." Another silence, this one sharper, more dangerous. From the edge of the street, voices began to rise again. People calling to each other, moving faster now, uncertainty spreading through motion rather than words. Hawk returned to Evan's side, pressing lightly against his leg, grounding, anchoring. Evan looked down once, then back at Lillian. "You still have time," he said. "For what? To not make it worse." Lillian inhaled slowly, her gaze drifting toward the direction of the school, then back to him. "For your sake," she said quietly. "I hope you're wrong." Evan didn't answer. He watched the rain as it slipped through the thinning snow, disappearing into the ground without resistance. The system beneath them was not failing. It was filling. And it was deciding where to go next. By evening, the town no longer pretended to be calm. It organized itself, not around truth, around authority. Vehicles lined the main road, headlights cutting through the gray rain and thinning snow. People moved with purpose now, carrying bags that were too small, too light for what they were leaving behind. Doors were locked carefully, as if the act still meant something. The evacuation order had taken hold, and like all orders, it carried comfort, structure, direction, even when it was wrong. Evan stood at the edge of the street, watching it unfold. Hawk stood beside him, silent, still, focused downward. Pierce approached from behind, steps steady, controlled. "It's done," he said. Evan didn't turn. "What is?" "The report," Pierce replied. "Filed and circulated." Evan exhaled once, slow, measured. "And?" A brief pause, then, "You've been identified as the point of escalation," Pierce said. Evan almost smiled. There it was. Not unexpected, not surprising, just confirmed. "What exactly did I escalate?" Evan asked quietly. Pierce's tone didn't change. "Unverified claims, civil disruption, unauthorized interference with evacuation protocol." Evan turned then. His eyes met Pierce's, cold, clear. "You mean I saw something you didn't want documented?" Pierce didn't deny it, didn't confirm it either. "That depends on perspective," he said. Behind them, voices rose as people were directed toward the southern edge of town, toward the school. Evan looked in that direction again. The slope, the quiet, almost invisible pull of the land. Hawk shifted beside him, not toward the movement, away from it. Evan noticed, he always did. From across the street, Miriam approached, her pace faster now, tension visible in the way she held her shoulders. "They've locked the routes," she said, breath visible in the cold air. "All traffic is being funneled one direction." "South," Evan said, "and yes." He nodded once. "Of course it is." Miriam hesitated, then lowered her voice. "They're saying you caused this." Evan's expression didn't change. "They need someone who isn't them," he replied. A third figure joined them then, Sheriff Daniel Rourke. He was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered, with a heavy build that spoke of years spent carrying both physical and unseen weight. His dark hair had gone mostly gray at the temples, cut short but uneven. His face was lined, not just from age, but from decisions that had stayed with him. He wore a sheriff's jacket, unzipped despite the cold, revealing a worn uniform beneath. His eyes were tired, but not blind. "I've been told to keep you out of this," Rourke said, stopping a few feet away. Evans studied him. "And are you going to?" Rourke didn't answer immediately. His gaze shifted to Hawk. The dog stood still, head low, eyes not on the man, but on the ground between them. Rourke followed the line of sight unconsciously, then back to Evan. "You've got about 10 minutes, he said quietly. That's not much, Miriam said. It's more than you're supposed to have, Rourke replied. Evan nodded once. Where is it? He asked. Miriam understood immediately. The church, she said. It's the only structure that hasn't shown instability. Granite foundation. Gideon's voice came from behind them. Because it's the only thing here built on ground that tells the truth. He stepped forward slowly, rain soaking into his coat without concern. Evan looked at him. Still think going down is the only option? Gideon didn't hesitate. It's the only one left. They moved quickly, not running, not drawing attention, but with purpose. The church stood at the northern rise of town, slightly elevated, not enough to stand out, but enough to matter. Its stone exterior was weathered, old, the kind of structure that had survived not because it was strong, but because it had been built in the right place. The doors were closed, but not locked. Inside, the air felt different, dry, still, unmoved. Evan stepped forward, boots echoing softly against the stone floor. Hawk followed close, but his pace slowed immediately, each step deliberate. Miriam moved beside them, scanning the interior. This place sits above the old network, she said. If there's an access point, it would be here. Gideon moved toward the back wall, fingers brushing against the stone as if following a memory. There used to be a service hatch, he said, long time ago for inspections. Evan turned, scanning the floor, stone slabs, even, uniform, too uniform. Hawk moved ahead, not searching, knowing. He stopped near the center aisle, lowered himself slightly, then raised his head, not toward the ceiling, toward Evan. For a moment, everything else faded. The rain, the voices outside, even the tension that had been building all day. There was only that look. Hawk's eyes, steady, unblinking, locked onto Evan with a clarity that felt almost human. Not fear, not warning. Recognition. As if the dog had reached a conclusion. As if the question had already been answered. Then Hawk stepped aside, just one step, and sat, perfectly still, waiting. Evan didn't move immediately, because he understood something in that moment that had nothing to do with maps or data or orders. The dog wasn't reacting anymore. He was pointing. Evan stepped forward one pace, then another. He stopped exactly where Hawk had been. The stone beneath his boots felt different, not unstable, not hollow, but interrupted. He crouched slowly, ran his hand across the surface. At first, nothing, then a line, so fine it could have been missed, running between two slabs. He pressed harder. The seam shifted just slightly. Enough. Evan looked up. Miriam. She was already moving. They worked quickly, no time for hesitation now. Miriam knelt beside him, brushing away dust and debris that had settled into the seam over years. It's sealed, she said, but not permanently. Gideon moved in, producing a small pry bar from inside his coat. Everything built by men can be undone, he muttered. Evan took the tool, positioned it carefully, applied pressure. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a dull crack. The slab shifted, just enough to reveal darkness beneath. Cold air rose from the opening, not the sharp cold of winter, but something deeper, older. Evan leaned back slightly, allowing space. Miriam pulled a flashlight from her bag and angled it downward. Stone steps, narrow, descending. Water glistened faintly along the edges. Gideon exhaled slowly. It's still active, he said. Outside, a distant shout echoed. The evacuation was accelerating. Time was running out. Sheriff Rourke's voice came from the doorway. You don't have long, he said, and they're going to lock this place down. Evan stood, looked at the opening, then at Hawk. The dog had not moved. Still sitting, still watching. Not afraid, ready. Evan nodded once. Then we don't waste it, He stepped toward the edge. Miriam followed, Gideon close behind. Rourke hesitated only a second, then stepped in as well. Above them, the church doors creaked slightly as the wind shifted, or something else. Evan placed his foot on the first step. The stone was wet, cold, real. He didn't look back. "Stay close," he said. Hawk rose immediately and moved ahead, descending first. Not into darkness, into direction. Evan followed. Because running was no longer an option, and whatever had been building beneath Bright Hollow was waiting. The air changed the moment they descended. Not gradually, immediately. It grew heavier with each step, as if the space itself resisted their presence. The narrow stone staircase spiraled downward beneath the church, each step uneven, worn not by time alone but by purpose long abandoned. Water greeted them before sight did. A thin layer at first, coating the steps in a slick sheen that caught the dim light from Miriam's flashlight. It reflected upward in trembling fragments, distorting the walls into something less stable than stone. Evan moved first, always first, his boots pressed into the wet surface carefully, testing each step before shifting weight. His breathing remained steady, controlled, though the cold rising from below seeped through the fabric of his clothes like something alive. Behind him, Hawk descended without hesitation. The German shepherd's body lowered instinctively, shoulders tightening, weight balanced. His paws placed with precision, avoiding the slickest parts of the stone without needing to see them clearly. His ears flicked constantly, adjusting to sounds that hadn't yet reached the others. Miriam followed, her movements deliberate but slower. Her grip tightened around the flashlight, the beam steady but her breath slightly uneven. Gideon came next, one hand brushing along the wall, feeling the structure like a man reading a familiar language. Last was Owen Pike. He was young, 29, maybe 30, with the kind of build that came from physical work rather than training. Broad shoulders, solid frame, but not yet refined by experience. His short blonde hair clung damply to his forehead, and a faint scar cut across his chin, old but noticeable. His eyes moved constantly, not like Evan's, measured. More like someone trying to catch up with something already moving too fast. "You've been down here before?" Evan asked without turning. Owen hesitated. "Not like this," he said, "and just when they were building it." Evan slowed slightly. "You worked on the project." Owen nodded, though Evan couldn't see it. "Temporary crew," he said. "We sealed sections, reinforced others." "Why?" "Orders," Owen replied. "Simple, and not enough." The staircase ended abruptly. The tunnel opened out into a narrow passage of rough-cut stone. The walls uneven, the ceiling low enough that Owen had to duck slightly as he stepped forward. The water deepened, from ankle to calf within a few steps. Cold, not surface cold, deep cold. The kind that climbed through muscle and bone. Hawk moved ahead, pausing briefly at a fork in the tunnel. He turned his head, listening, not to the echo of their movement, but to something beneath it. Then he chose a direction. Right. Evan followed without question. Behind him, Miriam glanced at Gideon. "He's choosing based on current flow," she said quietly. Gideon nodded. "Or what used to be flow," he replied. The passage narrowed further. The walls grew closer, the air sharper, carrying a faint metallic scent that didn't belong to natural water. Owen noticed it too. "That wasn't here before," he muttered. "No," Miriam said, "because this system wasn't supposed to be under pressure." Evan stopped suddenly. Hawk had frozen ahead, not in warning, in focus. Evan stepped forward, raising a hand to signal the others to stay back. The beam of Miriam's light shifted and caught something embedded in the wall, small, out of place. Evan reached for it. His fingers closed around cold plastic. He pulled. A watch. Cheap. Worn. The strap broken, the face cracked, frozen at a time that meant nothing here. Owen stepped closer, his breath catching slightly. That's... He swallowed. That's from one of the missing reports. Evan turned the watch slowly in his hand. A child's watch. Bright colors faded by time and water. Miriam's voice lowered. Someone was down here, she said, after the system was sealed. Or brought down here, Gideon added. The tunnel seemed to narrow further around them, not physically, but in what it meant. Evan looked ahead. Darkness, movement, direction. He pocketed the watch. Keep moving, he said. Hawk moved again, but not forward, not immediately. He stepped into the water and stopped, completely still. Then, he lowered his body further, almost crouching as if bracing himself. His ears flattened slightly, not in fear, in resistance. Evan felt it a second later. The water shifted, not from above, from beneath. A slow pull. Subtle at first, just enough to tug at the fabric of his pants to alter the balance of his stance. Then stronger. The current began to form, not random, directional. Miriam's voice tightened. It's redirecting, she said. Owen took a step back instinctively. Redirecting where? No one answered. Because Hawk had already answered, he stepped sideways, not fighting the pull, moving with it, but along its edge, avoiding the center. Evan watched, understood. The current wasn't just moving, it was choosing a path, and anything in that path would be taken. Hawk glanced back once, just once, and Evan knew. Stay along the wall, Evan said, his voice cut clean through the rising tension. They moved, carefully, deliberately, following Hawk's path, not straight, not obvious, but safe. The tunnel sloped downward. The water rose from calves to knees within minutes. Cold turned to pain, then to numbness. Still, they pushed forward. The sound came next. A low, continuous hum, not mechanical, not natural. It vibrated through the stone, through the water, through bone. Pressure. Building. Ahead, the tunnel widened suddenly. They stepped into a larger chamber. Circular, carved by time and force. At its center, the water moved violently, not in waves, but in a controlled spiraling motion. A vortex without surface break pulling downward toward a narrow channel partially blocked by collapsed stone and debris. Evan scanned the structure. Then he saw it. The valve, mounted into the stone wall beyond the spinning water. A large iron wheel, rusted, corroded, half submerged in mud. It didn't look functional. It looked forgotten. That's it, Miriam said. Owen shook his head. No way that turns, he said. Not after this long. Gideon stepped closer, squinting. It was built to, he said. Evan didn't speak. He watched the water, the way it moved, the way it pulled. Not random, never random. Hawk, he said quietly. The dog didn't hesitate. He stepped forward into the chamber. The current hit him immediately, pushing against his legs, forcing his body sideways, but Hawk didn't fight it. He adjusted, lowered his center of gravity, moved diagonally across the flow. Evan followed. The cold struck harder now, chest deep within seconds, the current stronger, dragging at his legs, trying to unbalance him. He angled himself, one arm cutting through the water, the other reaching instinctively toward Hawk's position. Halfway across, the current surged, a sudden shift, violent. It hit Evan from below, knocking his footing loose. For a moment, he was weightless. Then gone. The water closed over him. Cold, dark, silent. The world vanished. No sound, no direction, just pressure. Then, a force at his sleeve, sharp, steady. Hawk. The dog's jaws locked onto the fabric, not pulling him up, not dragging him, holding him in place just long enough. Evan broke the surface with a gasp. Air burned his lungs, but it was enough. He found the wall, gripped it, pulled himself forward. The valve loomed ahead, close now. Reachable. He dragged himself onto the ledge, muscles shaking, breath uneven. Hawk climbed beside him, claws scraping against stone, body trembling but controlled. Evan didn't stop. He grabbed the wheel, pulled. Nothing. He adjusted his stance. Pulled again. A low groan answered, but the wheel didn't move. "Base!" Miriam shouted from across the chamber. "Check the base!" Evan dropped to one knee, plunging his hand into the mud at the base of the mechanism. Cold sludge swallowed his arm. Nothing. Stone. Debris. Then, Hawk moved. He stepped forward and began digging. Not randomly, precisely. His paws cut through the mud, clearing a small section. Metal appeared, a latch seized with rust. Evan wedged his knife beneath it. Pushed. For a moment it resisted. Then it snapped free. "Turn it!" Gideon shouted. Evan rose, gripped the wheel again. This time it moved. Slow, grinding, but moving. He pushed harder. The wheel turned. An inch. Then another. The chamber responded. The current shifted. The pull changed direction. From inward to outward. Water surged. Violently. Releasing pressure built over years. The entire structure trembled. Evan lost his footing again as the force reversed, trying to drag him back into the flow. A rope snapped tight around his waist. From across the chamber, Owen and Gideon braced, pulling hard. Hawk lunged, gripping Evan's harness, pulling sideways, not against the current, but across it. Evan found a metal ring in the stone, grabbed it, held. "Pull!" he shouted. They did. The strain held, then gave. Evan was dragged clear, collapsing onto the ledge, chest heaving, body shaking uncontrollably. Hawk stood beside him, not steady but standing. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Miriam's voice came softer now. "It's working." The vibration beneath them had changed. The pressure was moving, not gone, but redirected. Evan lay back against the cold stone, staring into the darkness above. Hawk stepped forward and placed one paw against his chest. Evan let out a slow breath. This time, he had listened. Morning did not arrive with relief. It came carefully. Like something testing whether it was safe to exist again. The storm had passed during the night. The rain had stopped, and the sky above Bright Hollow opened into a pale, fragile blue that felt almost undeserved after what had moved beneath the town just hours before. But the ground remembered. It always did. Evan stood at the edge of Main Street, boots planted on pavement that no longer lay flat. Sections of asphalt had buckled subtly, dipping inward in shallow curves that caught melted snow and thin sheets of standing water. Not catastrophic, but permanent. The kind of damage that stayed even after people tried to forget why it had happened. Around him, the town moved, slowly, carefully, not in panic, not anymore. People stepped out of their homes with hesitation, glancing at the ground before committing to each step. Voices were low, restrained. No one spoke loudly, as if raising their voice might disturb something beneath them. The school, once declared safe, stood in the distance, its lower entrance surrounded by a thin layer of water that reflected the morning light. Not deep, but enough. Enough to prove something. Evan watched it without expression. He did not feel satisfaction, only confirmation. Hawk stood beside him, still. The German shepherd had changed, not physically but in presence. He no longer moved ahead, no longer tested the ground with the same restless precision. Instead, he stood close, shoulder aligned with Evan's leg, head lowered slightly, ears angled forward, listening, not reacting. That was new. From across the street, Sheriff Daniel Rourke approached, boots splashing lightly through shallow water as he moved. He looked more tired than the night before, eyes darker, posture heavier, as if the weight he had been carrying had finally settled into something he could not ignore. "They're starting the inspection teams," Rourke said. Evan nodded once. "Too late for prevention," he replied. "Maybe," Rourke said. but not too late for accountability. Evan glanced at him. That depends on who's being held accountable. Rourke exhaled slowly. They took Pierce in this morning. That caught Miriam's attention. She stepped forward from where she had been speaking quietly with a group of residents. Her coat was damp, her hair slightly disheveled, but her eyes were sharp, awake, processing. On what grounds? She asked. Preliminary inquiry, Rourke said. Failure to disclose critical information. Suppression of reports. Evan's expression didn't change. He had expected that. What happens next? Miriam asked. Rourke shook his head. Depends how far it goes, he said, and who decides it should go further. That was the truth, not comforting, but honest. Mayor Lillian Cross approached them then. She moved differently now, less rigid, less certain. Her coat was still buttoned, her posture still upright, but there was something beneath it, something quieter, heavier. Responsibility. I've issued a full evacuation of the lower sector, she said. Evan looked toward the slope again. Good, he replied. She hesitated, then, I should have listened sooner. The words came without hesitation, without defense. Evan studied her for a moment. You listened when it mattered, he said. Lillian shook her head slightly. No, she said. I listened when I couldn't ignore it anymore. A pause settled between them. Then she looked past him, toward the north, toward the edge of town where the land rose slightly before giving way to the distant line of trees. The engineers are reopening sections of the old channels, she said. Controlled release. Miriam nodded. It'll help, she said, but it won't reset the system, not fully. Lillian absorbed that. I know, she said quietly. They walked together for a time, not toward anything specific, just through the town. Observing, confirming. At the edge of a side street, a man stood beside a damaged section of road, staring down into a shallow depression where the asphalt had collapsed just enough to reveal the stone beneath. His name was Walter Haynes, mid-50s, heavy-set, with thick hands that spoke of years of physical labor. His beard was untrimmed, flecked with gray, and his face carried the permanent lines of someone who had spent more time outdoors than inside. He didn't look up as they approached. I told them something was wrong, he said. Not to anyone in particular, just said it. They said it was frost shift, he continued. Said it happens every winter. He finally looked at Evan. It doesn't happen like this. Evan shook his head. No, he said, it doesn't. Walter nodded once, as if that confirmation mattered more than anything else. Then he looked back down. Hawk moved, not quickly, not urgently, but with purpose. He stepped away from Evan and walked toward the edge of the depression in the road. His paws placed carefully along the cracked asphalt, avoiding the weakest points instinctively. He stopped at the center, lowered his head, and listened. For a long moment, nothing happened. No movement, no sound, just the quiet aftermath of something that had already passed. Then, Hawk's ears shifted, just slightly. He tilted his head, not down, not forward, to the side, as if following something moving away, not beneath him, not here, somewhere else, farther, deeper. His body relaxed, not completely, but enough. The tension that had defined him for days eased, not because the danger was gone, but because it had changed direction. Evan watched him, understood. The system hadn't ended. It had moved, and Hawk knew it. By afternoon, Bright Hollow began to breathe again. Not fully, not freely, but enough. Work crews moved carefully along the reopened channels, guiding water into controlled paths. Pumps were set up where they could be, though everyone understood they were only temporary solutions. The lake, Frostmere, remained untouched. From a distance, it looked calm, still. But even from where he stood, Evan could see the difference. The surface wasn't solid, not frozen. A dark center remained, perfectly round like something that refused to be covered. Miriam joined him there. "You see it too," she said. Evan nodded. "It's not done," he replied. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." They stood in silence for a while, watching, listening, trying to understand something that had already proven it didn't follow simple rules. That night, Evan returned to his cabin. The drive back felt longer than it should have. The forest was quieter now, the snow settling again into something that resembled stillness. But it wasn't the same stillness as before. It felt aware. He parked the truck, stepped out. Cold air filled his lungs, clean, sharp, honest. The cabin stood exactly as he had left it, unchanged, but he wasn't. Hawk stepped down beside him. The dog didn't move ahead, didn't scan, didn't test. He walked with Evan to the porch, stopped, and then he remained there, standing, head lowered, listening, not digging, not warning, just listening. Evan leaned against the doorframe, watching him. A faint breeze moved through the trees, carrying with it the distant sound of water, far off, redirected, controlled for now, but not gone. Evan closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. "Good boy," he said quietly. Hawk didn't move, because some instincts didn't end when the danger passed. They waited for what came next. This story was never only about a town, or water beneath the ground, or a storm that came at the wrong time. It was about the quiet warnings we feel but choose to ignore. About the moments when something deep inside us whispers that something is not right. And we hesitate because the world around us looks calm, organized, safe, but not everything that looks safe will protect us. Sometimes God does not send a miracle as something loud or undeniable. Sometimes He sends it as a feeling, a hesitation, a voice you cannot explain, or even a companion who sees what you cannot see. And the question is not whether that guidance is real. The question is, will you listen? In our daily lives, we all face moments where we are asked to trust something deeper than logic. Moments where the path everyone else follows feels wrong, even when it looks right. That is where faith begins. Not in certainty, but in the courage to take one step forward when your heart tells you to. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who may need that reminder today. Tell us in the comments what part of this journey stayed with you, and what you felt while watching. And if you believe in stories of faith, courage, and second chances, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. May God watch over you, protect your loved ones, and guide your steps, even in the moments when the ground beneath you feels uncertain.